Let's get right into it. Number 10. The space knock that shouldn't exist. Imagine being sealed inside a multimillion-dollar tin can, floating hundreds of miles above Earth, and suddenly hearing knocking. Like someone outside your spaceship politely asking to come in. Yeah. That actually happened. Back in 2003, Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, the first person China ever sent into space, reported hearing a mysterious knock on the side of his capsule. It wasn't rhythmic, it wasn't mechanical, and it definitely wasn't coming from inside. Yang described it like someone hitting the outer hull with a hammer, which is an insane thing to say when there's literally no one out there but you, the vacuum of space, and maybe your impending existential dread. Mission Control, naturally, assumed it was just the usual space noises, the gentle creaks of temperature changes, the groans of metal expanding and contracting, or the slow disintegration of your sanity. But here's the weird part. He wasn't the only one. Other Chinese astronauts later claimed to have heard the exact same sound on other missions, even in different spacecraft. Scientists say it might be thermal expansion, metal flexing due to extreme heat and cold shifts as the craft moves between sunlight and shadow. But still, astronauts said it didn't sound like that. It sounded alive. So maybe it's nothing. Or maybe, in the quietest vacuum known to humanity, there's still something knocking to remind us we're never truly alone. Number 9. The whispering static. Space isn't completely silent. That's one of those cute lies sci-fi movies tell to make you feel better. In reality, there's constant hums, vibrations, and electromagnetic nonsense buzzing through your ship, and sometimes through your brain. Astronauts on the Apollo missions often reported hearing a faint whooshing or whispering static in their headsets when orbiting the far side of the moon, right when they lost contact with Earth. Perfect timing, right? Because nothing says relax like your radio whispering ghost noises when no one can reach you. In 1969, the crew of Apollo 10 described it as outer space music, a strange, otherworldly sound that echoed in their comm systems for minutes. It wasn't radio interference from Earth, they were too far, and it wasn't feedback from their own equipment. NASA later said it was likely the two spacecraft modules' VHF radios picking up each other's signals, but even that explanation left gaps. The astronauts joked about it, but you can hear it in the recordings, that nervous laughter that says, "Haha, this is fine," when it's very much not fine. Because imagine floating behind the moon, in the literal dark side of space, hearing alien elevator music through your comms, and trying to pretend it's just bad wiring. Humanity's bravest explorers, everyone. Number 8. The ghostly breathing. Here's a comforting thought. Even in space, you can still hear someone breathing when there's no one else around. During long solo missions, multiple astronauts reported hearing what sounded like breathing through their helmets. A soft, steady inhale and exhale that wasn't in sync with their own. Some described it as coming from the life support system. Others said it was distinctly human. One cosmonaut in the 1980s even recorded it, convinced his suit microphone was picking up an intruder's breath inside the cabin. Engineers found no mechanical cause, no leaks, no malfunction, just one man, alone, listening to someone or something exhale beside him. Of course, the human brain is a master of audio hallucinations, especially when deprived of normal sensory input. Your ears start inventing noises to keep you company, like a subconscious coping mechanism for the endless void. Still, that doesn't make it less horrifying, because when the nearest human being is hundreds of kilometers below you, and you hear someone quietly breathing behind your head, logic kind of stops being comforting. Number 7. The phantom radio calls. Houston, do you copy? Now imagine hearing someone else say that. Someone who isn't real. Astronauts have reported hearing distorted voices through their headsets, even when all channels are clear and no transmissions are active. Some sounded like garbled speech, others like full-blown conversations between people who didn't exist. Radio interference is a plausible culprit. Signals bouncing around Earth's magnetosphere can occasionally bleed into other frequencies. But a few incidents happened too far from Earth for that to make sense. One astronaut said it was like tuning into a ghost radio station in space. And since radio waves can technically travel forever, it's possible, in theory, they were picking up ancient Earth broadcasts echoing faintly through the void. So maybe that weird chatter wasn't a ghost, just a rerun from 1950 bouncing off the cosmos. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the universe's way of reminding us that even in the middle of nowhere, the airwaves are still haunted. Number 6. The screaming metal. No one really prepares you for how loud silence can be in space. Sure, sound doesn't travel through a vacuum, but inside your ship? Oh, it's a full-on horror movie soundtrack. Astronauts on the International Space Station have described moments when the structure itself screams. The metal twists and moans as the station shifts between sunlight and shadow, expanding and contracting under brutal temperature swings. It's like living inside a haunted submarine. Some astronauts said it sounded like groaning whales, or grinding machinery, or even low human voices echoing through the walls. At 17,000 miles per hour, your house in space is basically a pressure cooker of thermal stress. And every few minutes, it lets out a moody creak just to remind you that it hates existing. The human brain, wired to interpret patterns, starts filling in the blanks. That metallic shriek? Suddenly it sounds like a voice. That deep vibration in the hull? Clearly footsteps. And when you've been awake for 20 hours surrounded by infinite nothing, your imagination becomes your worst roommate. So when you hear astronauts joke about their ship, talking to them, it's not just space madness. It's 1,000 stressed-out bolts politely screaming, "Please stop heating and freezing me every 90 minutes. Basically, your orbital home is haunted by physics. Number 5. The unseen presence. Now let's get creepier because some astronauts didn't just hear things. They felt them. A surprising number of spacefarers have reported sensing an invisible presence nearby. Not an actual voice or face, more like an awareness. A distinct feeling that someone else was floating there with them. During long or isolated missions, astronauts described moments where they'd glance over their shoulder, fully expecting to see another person drifting in the cabin. One even said it felt like being watched by a silent companion. Psychologists have a term for this: the third man factor. It's a survival hallucination where your brain conjures up an unseen presence to comfort you during extreme isolation or stress. It's been reported by mountaineers, shipwreck survivors, and Antarctic explorers too. Your mind basically spawns an imaginary friend to keep you sane. But here's the creepy twist. Astronauts who felt this presence said it didn't feel comforting. It felt curious, like something was quietly studying them from the corner of the room. When your environment is absolute nothingness, your brain can't handle the sensory deprivation. So it gives you company. Whether that's psychological survival or cosmic voyeurism, that's up for debate. Number 4. The crying satellites. If you thought satellites were just silent hunks of metal, surprise. Some of them sing. And to astronauts, it sounds like crying. As satellites and spacecraft move through the thin plasma of Earth's magnetosphere, they sometimes emit eerie radio waves known as chorus waves. These can be picked up by onboard instruments and converted into audio frequencies. Long, drawn-out wails and whoops that sound disturbingly organic. NASA has released recordings of these space sounds, and they're straight out of a nightmare. The Voyager probes, Cassini, even the Juno mission, all captured noises that resemble whispering, moaning, and ghostly howls echoing across the void. Astronauts who've monitored these frequencies said it's like listening to space breathe. The radio static bends, flutters, and hums like a cosmic siren song. Totally normal until your 3 a.m. brain decides it's the souls of dead satellites begging for power. Of course, it's just plasma waves and magnetic fields interacting, physics doing its weird little dance. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Space doesn't just look lonely. Sounds lonely too. Number 3. The Russian SOS signal. Let's take a trip back to the early Cold War, when the USSR was sending all kinds of mysterious stuff into orbit and not telling anyone about it. In the late 1950s and early 60s, amateur radio operators began picking up strange transmissions from space. Among the static were faint Morse code messages, distress signals, heartbeats, even what sounded like a human voice gasping for air. Some listeners swore they were hearing the last moments of lost cosmonauts, secret Soviet astronauts who allegedly perished before Yuri Gagarin's official first flight. The most famous was a recording of a female voice saying, "I am hot. I can see a flame. Am I going to crash?" before the signal cut off. To this day, the lost cosmonaut theory remains unproven, and Russia denies it ever happened. But the recordings exist, and people have analyzed them endlessly. Most scientists agree it was probably radio interference or hoaxes. But psychologically, it's genius-level nightmare fuel, because it means that somewhere above Earth, people once listened to the static of space and heard a dying voice calling for help. Even if it wasn't real, that's the kind of sound that sticks to humanity's collective spine. Number 2. The humming Earth. You might think space is this cold, empty void, but from up there, Earth itself sings. And not in a beautiful blue marble symphony kind of way. More like a low, endless hum that seeps through your bones. Astronauts on the Apollo missions and later those aboard the ISS have reported hearing a faint vibration, like distant machinery or a muffled engine that never shuts off. Even when all onboard systems were silent, the hum remained. Turns out, our planet constantly emits what scientists call Schumann resonances, low-frequency electromagnetic waves generated by lightning strikes and the Earth's atmosphere. When you're up in orbit, your equipment, and occasionally your ears, can pick up those waves as a quiet, rhythmic thrum. It's basically Earth's heartbeat, a soundless sound that's always been there, but we never notice it from the ground. Still, to astronauts trying to sleep in the endless dark, that faint planetary hum feels almost sentient. Like the world below is breathing, whispering, "I'm still here." You can rationalize it scientifically all you want, but there's something profoundly eerie about realizing your home planet won't stop humming to itself like a lonely creature in the void. It's beautiful, in a cosmic horror sort of way. Number 1. The space choir. And finally, the creepiest sound of all, one that shouldn't exist at all. The space choir. In 2012, NASA released a set of eerie recordings captured by the Van Allen probes orbiting Earth. What they found sounded like a chorus of voices, hundreds of overlapping tones, rising and falling together like a digital cathedral. Scientists called it chorus emissions. Astronauts just called it nightmare fuel. Some described it as alien birdsong. Others said it was like an orchestra tuning instruments inside your skull. The sound is produced by energetic electrons trapped in Earth's magnetic field, oscillating in perfect sync, turning the vacuum of space into a ghostly concert hall. The Apollo astronauts heard versions of it too, strange, musical tones whispering through their radios on the far side of the moon. Back then, no one could explain it. Decades later, we know it's just plasma waves. But that explanation doesn't make it less unnerving. Because in a place where no air exists, no sound should travel. And yet, when you turn the right instruments toward the black, you hear singing. It's like the universe itself is alive, humming, vibrating, whispering just enough to remind us that silence doesn't exist, not even in space. So next time you stare up at the stars, remember, astronauts don't just see the void. They hear it, and it's not quiet. It's whispering back. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.